Hi, thank you for coming to this talk, especially after lunch. If you're anything like me, you get a bit of food coma, so coming to a talk about delivery math, like props to you. That's it's an interesting choice, but I will definitely run with that. If you haven't already, you've only got limited time available to fill out your bingo card and enter to win the prizes, so I suggest you get onto that. As we said, my name's Tom Ridge. I'm a staff engineer at Culture Amp. I do have attack eyebrows. And if you want to connect with me, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I am on Blue Sky. I'm not posting there super frequently at the moment. Otherwise, I do have some time available at the end of this talk deliberately for some questions so we can go into a little bit more depth. I will be around for afternoon tea, but I've got to fly back out this evening, so I won't be there at the after party. So if you do have any questions, please reach out. So this is a talk that I've been wanting to give for a few years now, but mostly owing to life and stuff. I haven't been able to, but it's about sort of being consistently wrong. And just sort of casting our mind back a couple of years, I'm running a team along with a couple of other leaders, and it's fairly remote and distributed. We have members all over Australia, including myself in South Australia. We have a member in Argentina and a couple of members in New Zealand. And we make a performance product. So if you've ever sat down, maybe annually or twice annually with your manager to do a manager review, we make a product that helps solve that problem. Now that tends to place constraints on us in terms of we need to have a lot of features ready to go at those sort of reporting times of the year, those manager review times of the year. So we have constraints around timing. We also have high expectations that stuff needs to work really, really well. If you're running a performance review process for 100,000 person organization, you really want to make sure that stuff works. But it also makes it really hard for us to kind of get that meaningful customer feedback that you kind of want when working in a product environment, because you tend to have 2 times a year to do it. And at this point in time, team morale isn't great. It's the middle of the pandemic, so for a lot of people, it sucks enormously, and that's understating things. And myself as a delivery lead, my top priority is actually that if you're going to come to work for 8 hours a day, I want that to be not a terrible time. But we're in a bit of a problem. We're working on this project and we're well behind schedule. What was originally around about a 10 to 12 week estimate has ballooned out to about 24 weeks. And that was following another project when I joined the team was quoted at 6 weeks that turned into around about 6 months. Right? We're stuck in this loop. And you're probably familiar with it yourself, right? This large, big upfront project comes down your way, spec'd out all these details, right? And you give an estimate and you're trying to consider all the possible variabilities and variations, and then you run overestimate, and what's your PM and designer going to do? But they're going to go and start speccing out the new thing, and then next thing you know, you're looking at another large upfront project, right? It's just a waterfall kind of style of working. There we go. And that's because we're trying to rush to kind of meet a deadline, and we're trying to handle the fact that we're horribly overestimate. The products that we're releasing have quality issues. Over the last couple of years, we've only released a big release sort of twice in the past 12 months, so there's not many chances to celebrate and learn. And that opportunity for team gathering and celebration is really, really important during this time. And when we cut scope, when we take things away in order to make the estimate be realized, we're cutting and hurting the integrity of that product, right? We're taking away from the designed solution. And because, our product and design is by necessity at least a few months already in front of the team because we're behind schedule, we've got poor collaboration going on between design and engineering. And because everyone's kind of pumping towards this deadline, it's really hard for us to respond to urgent requests, pivot suddenly, address, important bugs, or if someone needs to go on leave for an extended period, which happens, that further impacts our delivery timeframes. And although I don't think I saw a lot of this, right, a lot of people, myself included, certainly felt a little bit of pressure to go the extra yard and do a bit of overtime, right? And that's the last thing I want. And the problem is that we're always wrong, right? We're wrong about what our customers want. We're wrong about our estimates. And for us, we're building these large upfront projects that are taking months to deliver, and we deliver something that's wrong or that isn't used the way that our customers sort of wanted, but we've put all this blood, sweat, and tears just to kind of make this timeline true. It really kind of kills your morale. And around this time too, there's a big push at the company to improve our delivery predictability. Our team's not the only one that's running behind schedule on stuff, but I mean, that's 6 weeks to 6 months. I'm feeling a bit sheepish when my title's officially delivery lead at that time. This was a great career move. There is reason for optimism. Now, before we go on to any of this, if you want to start making change in your teams, right, you need to have that grounding in psychological safety. And I'm really grateful to say that there was a lot of really strong, really great environment for that psychological safety in our team. The team wanted change. I don't think anyone was under the impression that this was a good time. But they were all on board that we needed to move somewhere else, and they were all starting to contribute ideas about how we might get out of this mess. And we have some newish leadership. The Ish is somewhere in the audience. They'd been with us for about 3 months as a tech lead. But we had some new designers coming through, new product manager, and new leadership at the next level above us, which sort of gave us a little bit of breathing space and an opportunity to really kind of push to make a change. So how do we get out of this, right? Well, the problem really is that we have this really, really, really big build, measure, learn loop. And what I want to do is take it to this. Right, so even if our customer's only really using our product twice a year, I want us to be here. Because even if we have even we're creating a smaller loop for ourselves, we're moving faster through that loop, even if that learning is only for us, that is still way more valuable than the other place. That's going to give us tighter feedback loops. That's going to give us better quality and risk, because we can actually go ahead and really think about all the possible things that can go wrong in a smaller scale project, as opposed to missing the forest for the trees in a larger scale project. I want us to be delivering value sooner, getting 9/10 of the way by the time the end of year rolls around and having everything working great versus getting the whole way and everything being a dumpster fire is way more valuable to me. And I want stronger collaboration. I know from my own experience with running teams prior to this point that having a really tight collaboration between design, product, and engineering and quality is really key to producing really good quality products and outcomes. But I still have one big problem to solve in that loop: estimation. Can I just get a quick show of hands of anyone who's given an estimate in the past month and their internal monologue has been, "I've got no fucking idea"? Yeah, cool. Just want some quantitative data given the talk. And we are bad at it. We are catastrophically bad at it, as groups of engineers, as teams, and certainly our team is struggling with it. And of course, instead of trying to get better at it, I just decided to attack the idea instead. But the problem is that estimation is waste. Right? Ideally, I actually want my team members and engineers spending more time building product than in meetings. So any time that you're spending going and estimating, as opposed to really discussing during that refinement session why we're doing this, what options there might be, or how we go and attack it, we're not adding value to that product. And depending on the size of your project, the worse that estimate is going to be, right? Because it's when we know the least. And sure, we can communicate confidence ranges, but at the same time, when we start giving out estimates, we're incentivizing sticking to the plan instead of responding to change, which, I don't know, kind of seems pretty anti-agile to me. Worse, I start seeing this stuff. This was someone's post on LinkedIn a while ago, and I'm absolutely going to dunk on it because I just really don't like this idea of taking made-up numbers and adding made-up percentages because we're terrified that the answer we might give might either not be on the bullseye or too far away from the bullseye that it gets us in trouble, right? And Parkinson's law would tell us that work's going to expand the field of time available anyway. So the best thing you achieve with padding out those estimate timeframes is that you just spend longer doing the work. Estimation isn't forecasting. Right? When we take a complex system, and have a look at it, right, it's really, really hard for us to kind of consider all the possible variabilities and variations and how we interact with others through that system in order to come out with a number. But if we can measure how things move through that system and get data on it, then we can start having a discussion. But okay, fair enough. Like, we do actually need to be able to communicate when something's going to be done. Like, we have lots of big customer marketing exercises. Support needs to be involved. There might be other team dependencies and stuff like that. Totally understand that we need to be able to communicate when something can be done. And sometimes, to be honest, like, a deadline's a great forcing function in a team to kind of keep folks moving. But I'm still sitting there in the back of my head trying to figure out how I get out of this and how I can make sure that we deliver on time and how I can get people off my back. And around this time, we've got a couple of new delivery colleagues, and one of them hands me this. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar, this is really just Little's Law. This is just queuing theory, right? That the days remaining on something is the count of your stories divided by your work in progress, divided by your average cycle time. How long something takes to go from in progress through to done. To put it a little bit more simply, the time for the queue to process is the size of the queue divided by how fast the queue moves. So instead of viewing our work as this sort of big amorphous blob, let's start treating it like a queue instead. Let's stop trying to get it right with our estimates and start trying to optimize for that queue. So my colleague hands me a spreadsheet, and while the tail end of this project's still going, I dutifully decide to try it out and start tracking the team's data. Now, I want to stress it's really, really important if you're going to start doing this, but it's the team's data. It's not about any individuals. It's about observing how fast work moves through the team's system of work. And over time, I build up enough data that when it actually comes time to give a more updated estimate about when this work's going to be done, I'm able to plug it in along with that equation into my spreadsheet and actually have a pretty accurate view of when that work was going to land. Cool. So a new small project's coming up, and I decide to go all in, and it works great. This is a project that was only for a few weeks, so we could just go ahead and roll it out. But our team's now starting to explore a new domain, and I'm not so sure it's going to work quite so well. And the reason for that's really simple. We haven't started to optimize any of these levers yet. We haven't tried to reduce the size of the queue or adjust for how fast that queue moves. Reducing the size of the queue, though, is actually pretty easy, right? Really, if you cast your mind back, what we're trying to do is actually take that big build, measure, learn loop and turn it into this. And the easiest way I've found to do this is through user story mapping. The reason this is going to help us is because this also helps me double down on that, building that shared understanding and those learning cycles in the same team by having the team collaborate on building a shared understanding of the work that we're going to be doing and the work that we're not going to be doing right now. If you're unfamiliar, Jeff Patton's got an actually fantastic book on user story mapping as well as a bunch of great talks. But what we're mapping at a high level is from left to right in narrative order, the actions our users are going to take in our system, and then from top to bottom in priority order, the various stories that need to take place for us to facilitate that work. There's an example, I believe, from a Jira plugin called Easy Agile User Stories, something like that. I couldn't find one of our own. But you can see it at a high level there. There's your epics, your activities, like the main things your users are trying to do. And then you can chunk it up into those stories, but where it's really, really valuable and powerful is creating those slices. Right? Creating those slices of deliverable value to your customers, so that even if you cut it off after that first MVP, you've delivered something of value to your customers, you've learned something as a team, and you're able to potentially move on to the next thing, right? Because priorities never change in product, right? And what that allows us to do is focus again on that shared understanding, really hone in on outcomes rather than output. You're going to get better collaboration anyway. Like in our instance, because we started off at that user story mapping, our designer and some of our front-end engineers were able to immediately go to sort of wireframing and thinking about how that interaction might work. We're immediately able to start having conversations about some of that architecture, all while other things like the actual high-fidelity designs were getting worked out. And it helps us get to wrong sooner, right? If you're always wrong, the best thing you can do is just try to get to a place where you can get that feedback as soon as possible. then we can optimize the next part, how fast the queue moves. Now, I want to talk about work in progress a little bit because counterintuitively, potentially for the equation, you want to keep work in progress low. But it makes a lot of sense when you think about that anytime you've worked in a team where everyone's doing their own thing and tried to wait for a code review, it's taken you like 2 days just to get a review on something. Right? By keeping work in progress low, we're able to keep the flow through that team system of work, that various steps, fast, because the processing time at each individual point is going to be relatively quick. But there's other benefits here too, right? For us, we kind of optimize for around about 20% less than the size of the team. And that helped us respond to urgent requests or mobbing on unblocking issues. It fed back into that strategy of wanting to optimize for shared learning and understanding because there was always at least one group of people pairing. If someone's sick or the composition of the team changes or someone wants to have learning time, it's not going to impact your delivery timeframes because you're already broadcasting that this is the work in progress limit that we're working with, and anything beyond that is bonus. A really good analogy that someone keeps reminding me of is that if you're always working at 100% capacity, you'd be worried, right? So don't work at 100% capacity. Now for cycle time, we can't start talking about that except that I've kind of lied to you a little bit in that it's only half of the equation. How many of you have been in Macca's queue, just wanting like one thing, and some dude at the front of the line's ordering like the whole McMenu? Right? That's the problem we have with variance, right? Is that if things aren't the same size, right, and if you just want one Big Mac and someone wants a whole menu, you're waiting in that line until that dude's gotten every single item on his list. And if you have Jira, you can actually get a bit of a visual understanding of this. That blue band in this control chart that you'll see on Jira is actually the variation and the variance that you're going to get in your cycle time. And so your objective is to actually take that and try to keep it as thin and as consistent as possible. That variance actually has a big impact on our equation, right? Because this is your upper bound. And if that variation is large, like say, for example, if you have a standard deviation of 7 from your average cycle time of 5, right? You've got a very big range, and trying to go to your stakeholder, yeah, I think it's going to be done in 20 to 48 days, is probably not going to fly. Never mind that it's going to move through, like it's going to make your queue slower to process anyway. So you're actually optimizing for the team and for yourselves to try and get it around about the same size. So how do we minimize it? Well, we just really kind of want to attack along these different vectors. How much capacity we have, which we talked about with our work in progress limits. We want to attack how work enters the system, so before it gets picked up. And we want to attack how work flows through the system. And I tried splitting these up, but really it's all of these together kind of work in harmony to kind of give you that outcome, right? And our team, I really credit our tech lead a lot for when they joined, being really aggressive about attacking our backlog and ensuring that we're always kind of like working from like top to bottom in priority order and really pulling that work up and refining it as we go before bringing it in to the in-progress queue. Now, everything down the bottom, right, for us, about greater than about 4 to 6 weeks away, we weren't too fussed about making sure that all the technical details were figured out or every single component of that story was figured out or that it had even been sliced, right? Because what we want to try and avoid is making a whole bunch of technical decisions or product decisions that by the time we actually get to the work are invalid or kind of block us off into a corner that we can't get out from. But as it comes up that chain, right, and starts increasing that priority, we can go ahead and start slicing it. We can go ahead and make sure everything is 100% ready to go. We have really good conversation with quality about like sort of the risks and things that we might want to think about so that when it does get pulled in, we can just run with it. And really, that gives us less rework, right? So we can reduce variance that way, less risk because we're having those quality conversations and shifting left on quality and security before we even start. And less time spent in meetings, even though I've got everyone there in refinement, right? Because everyone's already aligned on the work and what they need to do and why. And if anyone in the team can pick those cards up, they will, and they do. I've kind of alluded a lot to this, but this is going to be your biggest impact change to start creating those smaller learning loops, even at a story level, let alone at a product level, and that's slicing. And we hadn't done it before, so a couple of colleagues very kindly volunteered to run a elephant carpaccio workshop for us. Has anyone here done one of those? Yeah, cool. A few of you, if you haven't, it's a great exercise to get into, because what it's going to train you for is how to slice work so you can deliver it incrementally, how you can start getting it to that smallest possible size and no smaller. So we took a fictitious sort of like product circumstance, went about figuring out all these different ways that we could slice the work. But what made it really stick for us was that we immediately applied it to the refinement session the next day. At every step of the way, we want to try and create a really tight learning and feedback circle, create more opportunities for you and your team to learn, right? And so how we tend to slice things is we just go, look, is it about 3 days worth of work? Right? And I didn't want you to have to think about it too much. I really want it to be kind of like a 2-minute, like, yeah, I think so. That's about the level of estimation that I want in those sessions, because that's all it needs to be. Now, if the answer was yes, cool, we'd bring it up the queue. If the answer was no, we'd have a conversation about slicing it. Now, we wouldn't always slice it. This has always got to serve the team. So if the team goes, look, it's just no point slicing this any further, we're not gonna like do anything, we're gonna make more work for us, don't do it. But in that case, what we do is try to put good signals around it so we could kind of keep an eye on it and set up things so the team could help move that work through the system a little bit faster. Otherwise, then, yeah, we'd slice along things like roles. So maybe the card was about admins and managers in our case. Function, maybe there was some export work there that we could pull out. Or we'd look for like seams in that story. Like anytime you see an and or a but, right? That's a good smell to maybe take that story and slice it through. Now, if you're in the habit of also, creating your stories as back-end focused and front-end focused, I'd encourage you to stop and sort of leave that level of detail as tasks within that story, right? Because as soon as we make that minimum sort of thing the story, it makes it a lot easier for us to communicate, within the team and to stakeholders when we've delivered those outcomes. Michelle Playfair actually put me onto I hadn't read it despite doing delivery stuff for a long time, lean software development, and I think this quote kind of encapsulates everything we're trying to do with slicing, everything we're trying to do with a team, and what really ultimately leads to good outcomes, right? Is that we're trying to create as many short learning cycles as we can and bring that information back into the team, iterate, improve, and repeat. And at this stage, we've got a lot of small cards, they're refined well, we thought about quality and security, and so once we pull it in, we just execute. It's not to say that there's not bottlenecks, because addressing them is the other thing that's going to help you remove that variation. But what I'd encourage you to do is create visibility around them. So Jira's got some cool features, I'm kind of cringing as I say that, about kind of keeping an eye on like how long something's been spending in the column, or if you're exceeding your work in progress limits. So use those information radiators to kind of give you an idea about where you're sitting and whether or not you need to actually start diverting resources into that. For those of you who are used to stand-up being like a little bit of a status update, if you shift it kind of goal-focused or you shift it to go, look, hey, this has been there for 3 days, can we get some help and support? All of a sudden that meeting becomes a lot more valuable. For me too, because I love nothing more than living in spreadsheets apparently, at the end of each fortnight I'd review that data and pull that in out of Jira and actually go and look for outliers and start to understand what blockers and what bottlenecks were occurring. It allowed us to identify things that we could solve within the team, but more importantly, things that were actually bothering us from outside of the team, take that data to stakeholders, and we ended up being able to second a couple of team members over into another team to improve some things in our design system so we could work a little bit more effectively. And to that end, swarm on them. If you're really stuck on something, the best thing we can be doing is trying to get that thing to done rather than going, oh, well, you figure it out, right? So go and pitching in and helping and getting that thing through to done has been really valuable. But now that we've got all these things in place, now we can actually forecast, right? Now we've reduced that variation. That's a lot more of a reasonable kind of conversation to have than where we started from. And for our team, even though the cycle time averages itself stayed pretty constant, that mean really dropped. Now we're still bad at estimating, right? Is it 3 days worth of work? Well, it was 5 days, basically, all the time. But that's cool. We're consistent, we're frequently wrong, awesome. And we're learning all the time, right? Now, if you're reading the talk promo material, right, spoilers, but we went from a team that released 2 big product releases in 12 months to 10 in 12 months, right? And look, actually, I've been in a team at the moment, we've just done a huge, big project, and everyone's understandably feeling really good about themselves. I tell you what, when you're smacking it out of the park every month, that feels awesome. Never mind all the free lunches I got. So the team was less stressed because work in progress was low. We didn't have any kind of concerns about blowing over our estimates. We'd started addressing bottlenecks, internal and external to the team, and having good conversations about the team's system of work and the company's system of work. We started, improving a lot of our quality. We had very few bugs come that really important time of year where our customers really need to make sure our shit works. My favorite part was that actually conversations with stakeholders become about value, not about dates. Instead of, when's it going to be done? It starts to be well, how do you know you're delivering the right thing? Well, what analytics are you putting in place to measure the value, right? Or what are you doing next? Right, that's a much better quality of conversation. I didn't talk about this with the work in progress limits, but one thing it allowed us to do was have more experimentation. It gave us the time and capacity and space to go and start implementing a new library at work, which is now used company-wide. And we talked about more team celebrations and learning, but probably one of the biggest benefits for me, particularly when I was line managing, was that when you've got a new project coming down the pipeline at least every 6 weeks, at the most every 6 weeks, if not sooner, it's a lot easier to start targeting those projects to engineers and really helping them grow. It's worked in other teams too, right? I've taken this and applied it to a team that was mostly a platform team, and we had them delivering on time within about 3 months and working in a product. For those of you familiar, a lot of what I'm talking about here is just lean systems thinking. Right? We're going through, we're eliminating waste, anything that doesn't help us deliver value. We're really, really focused on amplifying learning. We're deciding as late as possible, we're delivering as fast as possible, and we're trying to create as much opportunity to empower the team. So we've created a system that delivers consistent streams of value when we say we're going to, within a pretty acceptable range, right? Because when the train comes every 5 minutes, you don't give a shit about the schedule. So how can you do this? Well, in summary, really what I want you to do is just start measuring your team's cycle time data and flow rates, right? But make sure it's for the team. Don't be spying on individuals. Don't do that. Slice, right? Create all those opportunities to learn. Create those opportunities to get to that learning faster, right? And optimize your queue. There's some really recommended resources, and I've got a QR code next with the link to the slide deck, so you'll be able to grab these. Michelle's talk, Is It Done Yet? How About Now? Goes into a lot of detail about probabilistic forecasting and particularly confidence ranges and things like confidence on that forecasting. That's a really, really great talk. Neil Killick's Slicing Heuristics, I really highly recommend checking out. There's a lot of no estimates talk out there. Alan Halub's talk is probably one of my favorites. The Lean Software Development by the Popendix book is an evergreen read. I really do recommend it. There's a link to the spreadsheet that I was using there as well. Linear B is a thing. It exists. I'm obviously a big fan. But anything you can do to start getting that metrics and getting that information and creating that learning for your team, I think is going to be valuable for you. Yeah, there's a QR code there if you want to link to the speaker deck. I'm sorry, I couldn't actually immediately push it to the resources slide. I do believe we have a good amount of time for questions. About 6 minutes? Yeah, cool. 15. Oh, fantastic. Cool. So my name's Tom Ridge. I do have attack eyebrows. You can find me on LinkedIn. I will have plenty of time for questions, so please, by all means.
So the question is, days remaining equals to number of story remaining, right?
Yes.
So have you ever dealt with that you don't have all the stories figured out?
Yes.
And then how do you deal with that? Because we ran into that a lot. You know, playing one story lead to 3 other stories.
Yeah, 100%. So guess which part of the talk I cut? Just to recap the question was, look, hey, sometime, and please correct me if I'm paraphrasing a little bit, so please correct me if I'm wrong. Hey, sometimes you don't know all the stories up front, and in fact, some of my guidance there is that you don't want to, right? Like, you're not gonna have it all refined up front. Like, how can you be certain of that? And the answer is kind of like, there's 2 answers. One, check out Michelle's talk. It's great for like that because it's gonna give you like a range of percentages and probabilities over the stories you have. The second part though is because you've built up all this data, you're probably gonna have a pretty good instinct about when that, like how many stories you're gonna end up with. And you can use that data now to forecast as opposed to estimate. So if you think that, yeah, look, based on like how we slice this, there's probably gonna be about 15 stories there, you can go and take that and use that data to forecast that out and go, look, this is probably when we're gonna be able to land. The second part to that though is if you're reducing that input work to begin with, right, it makes it so that if you're off, it's by like 3-4 days on a 6-week estimate, right, which is a very easy conversation to have as opposed to where I found myself at one point trying to go, oh yeah, we're 6 months into this 6-week project, it's going well. Did that help? Yep, okay.
Thanks a lot, great talk. Really enjoyed it. My question is like, on slicing, do you usually do slicing like in a whole team? And I guess more specifically, like, how do you, so there are like, I don't know, deep engineers, right? Or kind of that don't really like, right, doing slicing and stuff. Though that whole equation works out kind of the same. So if you have, let's say, deep engineer and they would like pick up a story and work on it 2 weeks, and you know that on average it will be 2 weeks, right? And then average on the team will be the same. So do you kind of force everyone be a part of slicing, or you kind of just make it gentle on different types of personalities, I guess?
Just replaying that back, because there's a couple of things I'm hearing that I just want to make sure I'm covering off. So one is, do I make everyone come to do slicing and refinement? At this stage, yeah, I did. And actually, the times when it went poorly was when we were doing slicing, refining, and we didn't have enough members of the team there. Sometimes people are going to miss it. That's fine. Like, that happens. The second thing I was sort of hearing, and the other thing I kind of didn't address, is that you are, like, the reason I'm like, no, don't get variation to 0, just kind of try to get it as small as possible and as consistent as possible, is you will have natural variation in your team, right? Like, an associate engineer is going to work at a different pace than a senior or a staff, and that's natural, and you don't want to over-optimize for that. You just kind of want to make it as easy as possible to work through that queue. In terms of how they go, the whole thing with me is, one, we try to deliberately cap the amount of time. No one wants to spend 3 hours in a meeting, ever, especially remotely. The second part is that I tend to find is people's like or dislike for a meeting depends very proportionally on how valuable it is. So if they're in there and they're slicing and they're seeing that it's valuable and that we're not wasting their time and we're trying to move quickly, and more of that discussion is about, hey, do you think this is the right way to do this? You know, why are we doing this? And they're feeling engaged in a part of that process, then it tends to work pretty well. Great question.
What advice would you have at the beginning of a project where you don't have an average cycle time for stories?
Yeah, I'm sort of in that situation now. So it's probably helpful to talk, like as you saw, my title these days is staff engineer, not delivery lead. So replaying that, like, one is just kind of like, again, the safest move you can make is to try and reduce the scope of work. That is not always possible. The next best move I just tell you to make is just start measuring the data. Because at least then, like, if you're pushed into a situation where you have to estimate, fine. But you then can go and take that data and actually use that to have that conversation with stakeholders.
And then how would you, or what advice would you have in communicating with stakeholders when they ask when?
When, yeah. If they're asking you when at the start of the project, and particularly depending on the size of the scope of the project, I don't fucking know, it doesn't go down super well. The best that I've tried to do is go, look, we can go take a look and we can estimate, right? That's going to take a certain amount of time and it's going to be a pretty low confidence estimate because we haven't started the work yet, we haven't started learning yet, we don't know anything. I will absolutely acknowledge and agree with anyone that says like, yeah, you've got to start building that relationship somewhere. And the unfortunate truth is that estimation is kind of the done thing everywhere, right? Until you've actually got data to start backing that up to go, look, hey, we can remove these shackles from ourselves. We can be delivering consistently. Here's the data to prove it. You've kind of got to start taking those baby steps. But you can't do it if you don't have any data. And it's certainly a lot harder if you've got a large scope of work to begin with. Does that help? Yeah, cool.
Just a quick question. When you prioritize your stories, how do you balance or manage between non-functional and functional stories?
Yeah, good. Like, just to clarify, you're talking about like, getting those kind of like technical tasks that are just like, one of the things I didn't sort of talk to in the user story mapping is there's going to be some stuff that you're like in your backbone tasks that just need to be there, need to be done. An example might be that I'm picking a contrived example, like setting up a Kafka consumer or something like that. Like that's just work you've kind of got to do. It might not be super easy for you to slice that. Again, just put good signals around it and try to move it through. Like it does just need to be a part of the work.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. How do you cope with, like, if you've got this cross-functional team that have sort of, you've got front-end engineers, back-end engineers, you get a bottleneck, and it's, say, in the front-end space, and yet you've got, but how do the back-end engineers help with front-end work, like, to remove those blocks when people are like, I'm not a front-end, I can't do that?
Yeah.
How do you work through that?
It sort of depends. I think, like, one, actually, and I hope members of my team at the time eventually get to watch this talk because I think a lot of this was actually, the team that I worked with was fantastic. I couldn't have wished for a better group of leaders, couldn't wish for a better team. And they were all, willing to kind of come up to the plate and like help and support each other. In a practical sense, there's going to be some things like in terms of that story where there's only like so much that back-end engineer can do. In one hand, that's still why I kind of go, look, hey, this is we treat our work in progress limits at a story level. We might actually go and divert more front-end resources to that if that's the best thing. Sometimes there's value in pairing, or maybe they can go do some testing or something like that. But if we've exceeded that work in progress limit and there's really nothing for them to help out with or do, and I'm just picking on the back-end engineer in this case, it's a really good excuse for me to go, well, cool, go do some L&D, go do a walk, get away from your computer for 2 seconds. It's not a very practical answer, I'm sorry, as opposed to going, look, hey, like let's all be T-shaped engineers. But there's so much difference between the back-end and front-end spaces these days that I would feel, I would hate to go, no, you're a full stack now. That's not what they are.
Thanks, Tom. It was a great talk. Just want to get your perspective. What's your thoughts on team members like engineers and designers who have the skills that traditionally would have been sort of brought in by a delivery lead, whereas teams themselves are delivery leads themselves? Just curious, do you have any perspectives on that?
So just making sure I understand. You're saying like, what's my perspective on like designers and other individuals having like those delivery skills? I don't know, I'm a staff engineer.
Yeah, because I noticed that in your LinkedIn, you used to be a delivery lead.
Yeah.
And you came back to
I'm being a little bit cheeky about that. Like, I think it's great, right? I obviously think it's great because I care a lot about, really, actually a lot of the reason I went into delivery in the first place is because ultimately working with great people and seeing like all like the amazing skills and potential that they have and wanting them to help do that and not feel guilty about missing a deadline, but feel great about all the work that they're doing. I think that's kind of where I went into that space. So coming back to your question, what do I think about designers and others having those delivery sort of skills, even if they don't have a delivery lead? Yeah, I think that's awesome. I think that's kind of how it should be. You know, like I'm not saying like you necessarily have to have one or the other, but the more individuals in that team interested in helping that team work in a more agile kind of fashion, the better off you're going to be. But did that help answer the question? Yeah, okay, cool.
Hey, loved the talk. I've probably an extension to the question about non-functional requirements. I like the idea of tracking user stories as a delivery of value rather than your back-end, front-end breakdown. Keep those to the subtasks. But practically speaking, do you have any advice or strategies about not having a disconnect between product concern and dev concerns, where the devs are off doing these little incremental items and losing track of what the user story is?
Okay. So just replaying that back, he's sort of talking about like the engineers kind of losing sight of what they're trying to build?
Yeah, so I'm thinking about the scenario where you wouldn't have a specific person calling out the connection between these three separate small cases are actually this value. If you leave it up to the dev team,
yeah,
are they going to deliver the back-end stuff and not do the front-end stuff and lose track of the value that's being delivered?
Grab me after this if I don't get it right, because I'm sort of mindful that we might be getting close to time.
Sure.
But replaying that back, I think one of the things maybe is that when we had stories in our team, and one thing I'm a big proponent for, is that there needs to be someone that's owning that. And there needs, like, whoever's owning it is responsible for seeing it through to done. So the reason I'm calling that out in this particular case is because I suppose what I'm kind of struggling to articulate a little bit is that there really does need to be, at a team level, that connection between like why we're doing the thing we're doing, like what outcomes are we trying to deliver. And then like as engineers, our job is to go, okay, cool, this is how I think we should do it. Now, if those two things are separate, it kind of maybe speaks to that product function might not be as strong as we want it to be, or they're not working as collaboratively with the team as they should be. And vice versa too, I have seen some engineers go, I don't want to think about the product and I just kind of want to go and ship code. But that's a really hard thing to say in a product environment because like our job is not necessarily to write code so much as it is to solve customer problems. And that might not mean that we're solving it in the way that our product manager or our designer had originally intended, right? A project I worked on, we had 2 weeks to solve something. And I came down and this PM had like 6 sheets of like all this spec to go and build. Oh, you think we can do this in 2 weeks? No, we can't. We could do that sort of thing. But that space, when you start trying to think creatively about how to solve those problems together and own it as a team, works really well. If everyone's kind of off doing their own little thing and not communicating and not talking and not really kind of focusing on moving that card through, then it makes it real difficult.
Cool, thanks.
We have 1 minute and a half. So yes, no question?
Hi, Tom. Great presentation.
Thank you.
My question is around a line which I had seen which said that estimation is not forecasting.
Yes.
You know, as a delivery lead, you know, when projects are sort of kicking off, so my question is more around the planning part of it, right? Sometimes you have to forecast, you have to plan for it, right? So you're asked, hey, you know, you need to set up a team, you need to estimate, you know, how much funding you need to actually get started. And sometimes, you know, you've got to have a 2-year, 3-year plan for programs. So in that initial level, when you've got a very small view of the scope, you know, probably it starts with a 1-2-liner. How do you estimate, you know, what would be those key things to keep in mind and then sort of plan ahead? Thanks.
So I'm going to try and, before I forget to thank you all, these were fantastic questions and thanks for coming today. I really, really appreciate it. I will be around to take more questions and I will be around the afternoon tea, so do come grab me. I am flying out, but do come grab me. To kind of get to your thing and like, hey, when do we think this stuff, like we've got all these different pieces of work that we want to do, when do we think it's going to be done? I tend to think in terms of now, next, later horizons. So the now stuff you should know really well. And one of the things Neil Killick talks about when he talks about like slicing heuristics and slicing up and down the value chain is that you can actually kind of go, oh, well, our epics are usually this many stories. This is how many epics that we think we're going to have. So this is my forecast, right? And just use that same function. The next stuff, I can kind of put a finger in the air and go, oh, we tend to work in these projects, it's going to be around about that, but feel pretty confident because of that data. The later stuff, if they're wanting to know like when the stuff is going to be delivered that you've got scheduled for like 2 years away, I'm sorry, this is not helpful. I consider that a very strange conversation because it just implies that you know everything that's going to happen and that your customers are going to love all your stuff, and it's just not true. And I don't know where I'm going to be in 2 years. I barely know where I'm going to be in 4 days. So, you know, it just doesn't sit with me. And I haven't had to have those conversations, so I apologize.